Good afternoon, CBF Virginia. This is Mark Snipes, the Associate Coordinator for CBF of Virginia. And today I am so excited to talk to Jason Coker, the National Director for Together for Hope. Jason, we're so glad you're with us.
It's a pleasure, Mark. Thanks so much for asking me to be a part of this.
Absolutely. So Together for Hope has been a big part of CBF for a long time. But here in Virginia, we are still trying to catch up to what Together for Hope is. We just started a Together for Hope site in Southwest Virginia, and we're really excited about what that can mean for us. But how did Together for Hope begin?
Together for Hope started, it'll be 20 years ago next year. So we're right at that 20-year threshold. And there was a guy in CBF who was real passionate about cities, oddly enough. And so he was like, what cities do we need to be in America? So he kind of put this team together and they said, what are the 5 poorest counties in America? And they came back all rural. And he goes, all right, well, what's the 10 poorest counties in America? And they came back all rural. And he goes, all right, what's the 20 poorest counties in America? And the top 20 poorest counties in America were all rural. So it was a turning point in that process. They said, okay, maybe we need to pay attention to rural America. And that's what it started as the Rural Poverty Initiative in 2001. And it initially was a 20-year commitment to the 20 poorest counties in the country. And over the past 20 years, we've learned a lot, we've grown, but one of the bedrocks in how we go about this work is called assets-based community development. So that is kind of a founding principle that we follow in everywhere that we go in Together for Hope. So that's how it started, and that's kind of some of the foundational stuff around it.
So what is the central focus for Together for Hope?
So assets-based community development is our philosophy. Our focus is on the 301 counties of persistent rural poverty in America. That is our service area. And I think you're going to ask a little bit about what constitutes a county, or how does a county end up being in the category of persistent rural poverty. That's defined by the USDA as a rural county whose population is 20% or more living below the federal poverty line for the past 30 years. And they use census data to do that. And we are in a census year right now. So what we've been using goes back to the 80s, but with this new year, we're looking at a shift in counties just this coming year. So on our 20th anniversary, we'll also have a shift in those 301 counties. Some of those counties have become populous, so they're not rural anymore. Some of those counties have had a couple of good, decades, so they've moved. But we anticipate there being a lot more counties in persistent rural poverty because the economy hasn't favored rural in this past decade. So we feel like the only movement out of those of the rural counties, the persistent rural poverty counties, would be counties that have grown. And the Rio Grande Valley down at the Texas border, some of those counties down there have really had a population increase in the past decade, which may bump them out of being considered a rural county.
So reading up on Together for Hope and looking at the map, I couldn't help but see that almost every county could be put into 5 different categories. They're kind of all grouped together. Why is that?
Yeah, so we look at those 301 counties, and when we look at the map and you map it out across the country, they fall into what we're calling 5 ethnogeographies of persistent rural poverty. So there's a cluster in Appalachia, there's a cluster in the Black Belt, which goes from Alabama all the way to Southern Virginia. There's the largest clusters up and down the Mississippi River Delta, which is the Delta region, the Rio Grande Valley on the border of Texas and Mexico, and native lands. Native lands is the most disparate and most different because The Navajo Nation in northern Arizona is a part of that, as well as certain Lakota lands in South Dakota. And that's wildly different, people. So native lands is definitely the most disparate. And in all of those places, uh, the native lands in particular, these are people who have historically been displaced by government war, federal government war and policy. So it is generational from a policy level there. Rio Grande Valley, Delta, and the Black Belt, these are all agricultural centers in America that have suffered from the economy that has abandoned labor. First, through the mechanization of labor. So there used to be a lot of people working in the fields, and cotton fields in particular. And when cotton pickers were created, all those people lost their jobs. And then government policy like the North American Free Trade Act, NAFTA, when that was passed, a lot of manufacturing jobs in those same areas moved out of country and abandoned labor again. And in Appalachia, it's coal and other industries like that. So in every one of those regions, the reason why you have these big pockets is because some major industry has left labor and abandoned the people there. And so that's the real story of persistent rural poverty in America. It's not that these people are lazy or don't want to work. It's just that there's not enough jobs there for everybody to be employed. And there's a technical term for that called rural overpopulation. It's not that there's too many people that live in rural space. It's just there's not enough jobs for everybody who can be employed to be employed.
So it sounds like in the past 20 years, CBF has really been able to identify some of the issues and the problems surrounding these 301 counties. Can you tell us a success story or two that reflects kind of the success of Together for Hope?
Yeah. Well, let me say, we have the philosophy of assets-based community development. We have the focus on the 301 counties of persistent rural poverty in those 5 ethnogeographies. But we have 4 priorities of hope. That's education, health and nutrition, housing and environment, and social enterprise. So that's our priorities. And so every one of our organizations at least are involved in at least one of those priorities of hope. And then the way we go about those priorities is through our 3 strategies of interventions, innovations, and advocacy work. So some great stories has been, one young man from the Mississippi Delta who grew up through the Delta Hands for Hope organization that's part of Together for Hope there in Shaw, Mississippi. He's now a junior at Mercer University. Rodarius Phillips. Rod is exciting to be around. He's into photography and producing video movies. He's been able to travel from California to New York. I mean, that's a great story for all of us. Another one is Miss Frances Ford there in Alabama. Miss Frances has been a nurse practitioner running Sowing Seeds for Hope for over 20 years. They predate being a part of Together for Hope. And because of her advocacy in Perry County, Alabama, she's won a dialysis clinic for her town, for the whole community. And that dramatically has affected the health of people who were going to Birmingham for dialysis. Now it's right there. She became part of Alabama's Nursing Hall of Fame in the past couple of years. She's just extraordinary. We have Jorge Zapata down in the Rio Grande Valley who does a myriad of things. There's Scarlett Jasper in Appalachia, Anna and LeCount Anderson in North Carolina. These are just incredible folks doing incredible work, and there's not just one story. There's a lot of stories behind our folks.
So you hit our buzzword. So CBF Virginia is focusing a lot on what it means to be an advocate. So advocacy. Yeah. So what does advocacy mean to you and to Together for Hope?
Well, I'll give you a very specific example of advocacy that we're participating in right now in the state of Mississippi. I have dual roles. So I'm the national director of Together for Hope, but I'm also the state coordinator for CBF Mississippi. And CBF Mississippi, we've been working with and building a coalition kind of as an intersection between Together for Hope and CBF Mississippi. We've been building a coalition around food and hunger throughout the state. So last year, we co-hosted with the Mississippi Center for Justice about 5 regional food summits where we gather people together from all parts of the food industry: farmers, grocery store owners, restaurateurs, food policy people, government SNAP benefits and TANF benefits people, and started building an umbrella for all of us to come together and talk about food insecurity in the state of Mississippi and how to streamline the process to make sure people get fed, because we're the most food insecure state in the nation. Well, this past year, we co-wrote a grant with the American Heart Association here in Mississippi, and we received about a $200,000, it was a $198,000 grant from Voices for Healthy Children. So we're taking that money, and we have a statewide campaign going on right now in the state of Mississippi called Grow the Good. And my job and CBF Mississippi's job is to work at the grassroots level. We have Linda Stringfellow, who's the vice president of Together for Hope Delta. She and I are working hand in hand on the grassroots. We've divided the state into 5 regions, and we've identified leaders in each 5 region, and they are getting the word out about this campaign from the grassroots level. Local churches are getting involved so the churches can know what's going on, and then we're building that grassroots into a movement so that we can begin to engage our state legislators in the policy that we're trying to create. So the Grow the Good campaign is literally an attempt to get the state of Mississippi to increase its budget specifically for SNAP incentive programs in the state of Mississippi by $700,000. So we have engaged the Department of Human Services at Mississippi. They've agreed to house that $700,000 in their budget. The director of Mississippi Department of Human Services has engaged the governor of Mississippi, Tate Reeves, and Tate Reeves has agreed for it to be there. So they're going to put a placeholder in their budget for it. And now we have policy. We have policy being written both in the Senate and the House, to be in the Senate and the House, about that $700,000 SNAP incentive programs. We'll put those bills into the hands of our legislators. The American Heart Association has hired a lobbyist who will then engage all those politicians. And so we're engaging the politicians at the grass tops, and we're building momentum at the grassroots. And the whole campaign is built around a SNAP incentive program called Double Up Food Bucks. And Double Up Food Bucks is nothing more than a program, an incentive program that says if you use SNAP benefits, if you have an EBT card, it used to be called food stamps, and you purchase fresh vegetables or fresh fruit at a grocery store or farmer's market, and that farmer's market and grocery store is participating in the Double Up Food Bucks, for every dollar or for every apple you buy, the incentive program basically says you can buy 2 apples.
Wow.
You get a 2-for-1 economic generator based on those SNAP benefits. So instead of being able to buy a pound of bananas, you get to buy 2 pounds of bananas. And that basically gives families who use SNAP benefits twice the purchasing power for fresh fruits and vegetables. That money is directly invested into local grocery stores, local farmers markets, and the economy grows, right? This is federal dollars coming in the state of Mississippi from the outside. And for every dollar you spend in that sense, there's a multiplier effect of $1.7. So that $700,000 has a capacity to create over almost $1.5 million of revenue in the state of Mississippi around this one single incentive program. So we're advocates for that, right? We are actively participating in the process to move our government from point A to point B around getting healthy food into the mouths of people who need it. And in the process, helping out the economy in the state of Mississippi. And we're doing it based on like our Christian faith and the way we understand what God wants in this world. So that's a big, long example of advocacy. It can be as easy as signing a letter where you have a bunch of people trying to speak with one voice that says we want this to happen in the state, or we want this to happen in our town. You can absolutely get involved in your local municipal government, build a coalition of people and say, this is what we want. And, how can we work with you to make sure we get this? And so advocacy is the power of the people. So maybe that's a longer story than you wanted, but
no, I think that is absolutely fascinating. And I can see how that directly ties into the work of Together for Hope. Now, you also mentioned that you are the coordinator for CBF of Mississippi.
Right.
So can you tell us how churches and individual lay people in Mississippi are connecting with this work?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to get the word out in our congregations. We don't have a lot of congregations in Mississippi that are part of CBF Mississippi. So it's, our communications is a lot easier. Getting the word out. Some of those congregations have legislators in them. So, putting the pressure by the people. And there's very technical terminology around some of this work, indirect and direct lobbying. You got to be careful with that kind of stuff. But listen, we're getting the word out with our congregations. We're telling our pastors, we're telling our lay people. We're talking to all these organizations, these 300 organizations that we engage in the Food Summit stuff. It's easy to get involved, find out who are your local representatives and senators. A lot of people just don't even know that. So a part of this is kind of divvying up the state into a map and congressional districts and who's in charge, and educating our people about, these are the people who make decisions. These are the people we elect so that they can go in and represent us when they make these decisions. And if we, like the decisions they make, we need to let them know that too, because it can be a thankless job to be a politician. I mean, these aren't, when you hear the word politician in politics, good things aren't the first things that come to your mind these days. And so, when they do right, you want to let them know that. But when they aren't, and they aren't representing what we think is the best interest for the people, we hold them accountable. The most powerful way to hold them accountable is the way we vote. Beyond that, you let them know. You call their office. They want to hear from you. They definitely want to hear from you. And in that sense, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So that call them enough for them to their office to know who you are.
Yeah, and the power of the individual is strength. But you're right. A letter written by Jason Coker has some power for sure. A letter written by Jason Coker that's also signed by 300 members of CBF of Mississippi has a lot more power.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, if we already in this coalition around food, we have 300 organizations. That's organizations, not individuals. So Mississippi Food Network is a part of that. There's the largest food bank in the state of Mississippi. Feeding the Gulf Coast is a part of that. The Mid-South Food Bank's a part of that. And those organizations provide hundreds of thousands of tons of food to people in the state of Mississippi. And those organizations are a part of the coalition. So when you write a letter, or you go to, have lunch with a congressperson and say, hey, listen, this is who I represent. That kind of voting block, those constituencies behind you, that's heavy business, because you represent people. And I worked in Dallas for a while, and I ended up going down to Austin and got to meet with a representative there. And we walked into this long, tall Texan's office, and we walked in, he shook our hands, he sat behind his desk, and he put his feet on his desk. And he said, what kind of power you got, boy? And I had no idea. I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, there's two kinds of power in the world. There's money power and there's people power. What kind of power you got?
Wow.
And I said, oh, well, I don't have any money power, so I definitely have people power. It's, and that's there. I mean, that's how a lot of politicians think. And you have there's two forms of power at least, money power and people power. And advocacy, my joke is that people power is represented by advocacy. Money power is represented by lobbyists. So there's a fine difference between lobbying and advocacy work.
Absolutely. So let's bring this to Virginia. So let's say that you are a pastor in Virginia and your church has not even talked about advocacy before. Where do you start?
Advocacy is always, I mean, and this is where assets-based community development is nuanced in that sense, because when you're only focusing on assets, you're looking, where's the strengths, what's happening, how can we be a part of, building those strengths up. But when you do that, and we did this at Bluefield, Virginia, West Virginia, when you go through an assets mapping exercise, you find all the strengths. And when you see all the strengths, you also see the gaps in services, right? And so those gaps, you want to play to the strengths and build those strengths up. You don't really have to do advocacy to do that because these are already strengths. But where there are real significant gaps, that's where you want to do advocacy work. That's where you want to add your voice and add your power to the most vulnerable so that we can pull those, deficits up to, strengths. And that, I think that's a good way to do it at a very local level, at your church, whether you're a church in Richmond or you're a church in Roanoke or a church in, there's so many towns I'm escaping. What's the one over there on 81 going north?
Harrisonburg.
It doesn't matter where you are. I mean, where your church is, there are places for you to advocate. Is there a grocery store that has close proximity to everybody in your town? And I, on a racial level, this is critically important. And, and it speaks to white privilege as something that white people tend not to see. Because where white people live, they tend to be fairly close to a grocery store. I'd encourage Virginia churches to go to a Black neighborhood because most of our towns are still fairly segregated. Go to the Black neighborhood and see what their proximity is to a grocery store. Then try to figure out what kind of means of transportation do people in that community have to get to that grocery store. That really starts kind of filling in some gaps for you. Because you don't live in that neighborhood, you don't know how far it is from a grocery store. Within a city, if you live more than 3 miles from a grocery store, you're considered a food desert. In a rural town, if you live more than 10 to 12 miles away from a grocery store, you're a food desert. So the question is like, are there food deserts in Virginia? The answer is absolutely. And how do you go about advocating to alleviate food deserts so that people can have proximity to food, and not just food, but healthy food? I mean, the gas station on the corner probably sells fried, in Mississippi, we sell fried chicken in every corner grocery gas station, and it's delicious, but it's not healthy for you either. So it's full of hot Doritos, hot Cheetos, and everything else. So you could, in my hometown, you can't buy a fresh leaf of a vegetable in our town. You have to drive more than 15 miles away to get a fresh anything. So, that's one way you can look at advocacy. Another one might be even more palatable for a lot of churches, like potholes. I mean, are your roads dilapidated? It's one thing to complain about it all the time. It's another thing to actually go door to door down the road, getting people's signatures, and then going to your town and saying, this needs to be a priority because we all pay taxes and that we've all signed on, and we're going to lean into you until you fix our roads. And if the town says, well, we don't have any money, then you say, okay, well, how do we petition the state? How do we work with you? That's easy stuff, right? And Dr. King, in his letter for Birmingham jail, he really kind of laid it out. He was being criticized for the process of the civil rights movement. And he said, we first say, is there an injustice? And if there is an injustice, number two, who do we negotiate with to alleviate the injustice and make the injustice justice? If there is no, if the negotiations fail, then, and this is what I love about Dr. King, then we have to self-purify. We have to analyze ourselves. And this is where he would, they had classes about nonviolence. And he basically says, you have to train yourself to be Christian, so Christian that you won't hit back if somebody hits you, that you won't retaliate with if a water canyon's sprayed on you. You won't retaliate if a dog is turned loose on you. You won't retaliate if you're punched in the face and kicked. You won't retaliate if somebody pours sugar on your head at a counter. So that self-purify is the third step. And then the fourth step is nonviolent direct action. And in the civil rights, it's the marches, right? That's where they would dramatize the injustice in all the marches that they did, the sit-ins, the pray-ins, the kneel-ins, the read-ins. All those were nonviolent direct action. I think that's a pretty good way to think about how you go about doing advocacy work.
So a lot of times when a church says that they're going to do mission, it's about giving away things, right? It's about, which is really important. People need things and we need to give them things in many ways. But advocacy is more relationship driven, right? It's more.
When people talk about charity or mission work, they think of, there's kind of these three broad categories of relief work, kind of like at disaster relief is one way to do it. Rescue is another way to do it, like rescue missions, mission trips. We're going to come in and rescue these poor people. A lot of church mission is in that vein. But the other one is development, and Together for Hope is a rural development coalition. So we don't see the people in these counties as problems. We see them as the experts on their hometown. And we want to work with those experts to hear what they want and hear what they have so that we can come alongside them and say, okay, we'll use our network to build these strengths. We want to work together with you to make sure the dreams that you have happen for your town. And that's where, advocacy happens. It's when you build those relationships, when you hear what your neighbor is doing and hear what they're doing that's good, and then hear what they need and work alongside with them, not in some kind of savior capacity, but as a co-laborer. And I think advocacy at its best is a speaking with our neighbors, and not just with them in a dialogical point, but speaking with them to those who are in power who can actually create systemic change. Change is the intervention part is basically saying, okay, the system is a failure, so we have to intervene. The educational system is a failure, so we have to create tutoring programs and after-school programs. The nutritional system is a failure, so we have to do summer food programs so that the kids can eat through summer. Those are all interventions, and they're very important. Innovation is saying, hey, this is not working, so how can we think up of new ways to do it? That's advocacy is saying, hey, the system's a failure, so we're going to go change the system. We're going to change the policy that's created this poverty. We're going to advocate for a better way to a better system that doesn't create this kind of educational failures, nutritional failures, housing failures, and whatnot. And advocacy is exactly that's the role it plays, changing the system.
Absolutely. So a couple of years ago, we began our work with partnering with people in Bluefield, Virginia. And it's been an exciting ride.
Absolutely.
I know that you came in and did a couple of asset mapping sessions. Do you have a story that you would like to share from Virginia?
Well, I mean, Travis Lowe he's awesome. I mean, and he's a local pastor, and I think he's bivocational. He works in a bank and he's a pastor, but he's also an entrepreneur. He does a ton of stuff in Bluefield, and he had created this. They already had a chamber of commerce, but he created kind of this group of business folks who got together and met on a regular basis. And he basically is like, we have some really good businesses that employs a lot of people in our town, and we need to figure out how to strengthen our businesses so that our people can be employed. And one of the coolest stories that came out of that, I was still a pastor in Connecticut at the time, I think. No, I wasn't. I was definitely doing this job. But there was a person in my church in Connecticut who was a global CEO of an exposition company. They're the largest exposition company in the world. And so whenever these industries would have their trade shows, they would hire his company to put the trade show together. Mm-hmm. So like Comic-Con, they were in charge of Comic-Con and these huge industry shows. And so Travis was telling me about these businesses. He's like, man, if they could go to scale, they could scale nationally. And this would be a huge boon for our town. They could, make their factories larger, employ more people. And I thought, listen, we need to talk to this exposition guy and see if the business they can't kind of incorporate. And sure enough, 4 out of the 5 businesses that Travis was talking about, this guy's company organized their national trade show. So that if they could get a place at the trade show and got one big deal, it could put them at scale at a national level. So they were all in connect. I gave reports to this exposition guy, and then he was like in the process of making sure these smaller businesses had a seat at the table at the big exposition stuff. So that kind of stuff was really exciting. And Travis is so innovative. It's just fun to watch what he does. And there's a lot of assets at Bluefield that's exciting. You got a couple of colleges there. Having a president of the university as on your team, that's fantastic. David Olive, the chair of the commerce. What's a commerce thing called when all the businesses? Chamber of Commerce. The head of the chamber was a part of it. We had a professor at one of the universities who was in the business professor was in it. I mean, just a lot of really high powered resources. And that's what set Bluefield off. I mean, they have a lot of people resources there that was really exciting to me. And it's a town of 11,000 people versus to some of our towns had 300 people in it, So there's a lot that's going to happen in Bluefield, and it's a lot of fun to see you guys galvanizing around the people there who are already doing great work.
Well, Jason, I want to thank you for your time. This has been fascinating. Just know that we are so grateful for the work of Together for Hope. So I want to leave you with one last question.
Okay.
What's next for Together for Hope? What's your next dream for this organization?
Since I've been in, we've been able to secure grants to hire vice presidents over 3 of the 5 ethnogeographies. So we have Rachel Gunner Shepard, he's the vice president over the Black Belt. We have Keith Stillwell, who's awesome over Appalachia, and Linda Stringfellow, who's the boss of the Delta, right? My goal is to have 2 more vice presidents, one over native lands and one over Rio Grande Valley, and then for them to have a full staff of people, because one person in charge of Appalachia or the Black Belt or the Delta, that's too much for any one person to do. I want I want Together for Hope to go to scale in order to be able to service those 301 counties. And that comes through regional staffs and having a national staff to build it out. So that's kind of me dreaming, mainly because if we had 3 organizations in each one of those counties, we would have nearly 1,000 organizations in the coalition.
Wow.
When you have 1,000 rural nonprofits speaking with one voice to the federal government, you will be heard. And I would love to build a coalition at that level to expedite the services that are available at the federal government directly to the grassroots in these 301 counties of persistent rural poverty. So expediting that kind of that resources, that's a dream of mine. And to be able to build the capacity of the local leaders. There are already organizations in these counties doing great work. We want to find them, recognize them, recruit them, and have them be a part of it so that we can be even more of a help to what they're doing. So that's my dream.
Awesome. Well, Jason, blessings on your work. Keith Stillwell has been a great asset already for CBF Virginia and for Bridges of Hope. And in just a couple of weeks, we're going to be doing a similar interview with Keith to share with our congregations and talk more specifically about Virginia. But again, thank you for your time. And any last words?
Yeah, Mark, thank you, man. I really do appreciate what you do in Virginia and how you operate. From seeing you at some of those early meetings, even a couple of years ago when you guys invited me to CBF Virginia's annual meeting to be a part of that. I'm grateful for you guys, because without you doing their advocating for Together for Hope work, it doesn't happen. And when you have state and regional coordinators of CBF who are on board and excited about Together for Hope, it makes our work so much easier. So I'm truly grateful to you. And you have so many churches in Virginia that are active in Together for Hope work already. Even some of them even come all the way to Arkansas to participate in it. So I'm truly grateful for what you guys are doing in the CBF Virginia office and to your congregations that you represent there in Virginia. So thank you, man.
Absolutely. Good to talk to you.